How can you be successful in graduate school as an international student? That's what we're talking about in this video. Hi, everybody. I'm Leigh from teachingacademia.com, and I'm all about giving you the tools you need to navigate academia to make your best impact. If you're new here, welcome. Please make sure you hit the subscribe button so that you get notifications because I put out new videos each week. Today, we're talking about what it takes to be successful in graduate school as an international student. And if you are thinking about doing graduate school in a different country in which you were born and raised, then you're going to want to pay attention to this video. I have with us Dr. Raul A. Mora, who lives in Colombia, South America, but has been and was a very successful graduate student at the University of Illinois. And so he's going to talk to us about what you can do if you think you want to be in this position, you find yourself in this position, and also his tips are going to help you understand if you are in graduate school, but you're not an international student, but you have international students in your program, things to be aware of, what you can do to help support them and help them be successful. So let's go listen to what he has to say. All right, thank you everybody for joining us. I am so excited today. We have Dr. Raul A. Mora with us. Raul, hello, welcome.
Hi, Leigh, welcome everybody.
Raul is an associate professor of English Ed and Literacy Studies at Pontifical Bolivarian University in Medellin, Colombia. He is also the chair in literacies. He also chairs the Literacies and Second Languages project there as well. Now, today we're going to be talking about how to be successful in grad school as an international student. And Raul has some experience with this. You have a lot of experience with this because you were a successful, highly successful international graduate student. You got your master's and your PhD from the University of Illinois, and part of that was funded by a Fulbright. So I know that you've got a lot to say to our audience in terms of what it takes to be a successful international graduate student.
Yeah, I'm looking forward, and I'm delighted to be here. I'm really excited to share some of my experience, knowledge, wisdom, whatever we want to call it, and especially with the international students out there who are doing such great jobs in international universities all over the world.
So when we think about what it means to be an international student in graduate school, what are some tips that you can give us that students should know, should be aware of, that will help them be successful?
Well, I think the first thing is be ready for the experience. I think the journey of becoming an international student begins long before you arrive. So my first tip would be start getting yourself, if you have that goal, and right now I'm actually speaking not even to the doctoral students, I'm speaking to the undergrads and the master students who may listen to this, that's where the road begins. When you're an undergrad, when you're a master student, and you start visualizing that becoming a doctoral student at a U.S. institution or any other institution in the world, that's the goal. So you have to prepare yourself for that from the beginning. That means, first of all, work as hard as you can on getting your language to a point that you can navigate the academic stuff without worrying about the everyday stuff. Because sometimes I see international students who have trouble navigating the daily stuff, and then they don't have enough time to focus on the academics. So start working on that, so that when you get to because once you get to the university system, there's a learning curve for everything you have to learn as an international student. You have to start learning to navigate the social conventions. How do I deal with professors? How do I deal with classmates? How do I address professors? How do I address classmates? And that takes time. There is also learning all the academic register that is involved with being a doctoral student, because in some cases you're gonna have to navigate that, and some of the issues that or dealing with that when you live in the world in two languages. And you have to really get to understand quickly how we communicate in English, how we write in English. So that takes a while. It takes a while from like when you write and you will notice when you write your first papers, and then when you get to write your dissertation, how different your language is going to be, how different it's going to look when you write. You go back and reflect on the very first paper you wrote in the very first class in your grad program, And then when you look at your dissertation, you're going to see growth.
It almost sounds like you'd recommend saving that first paper.
I would say, yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
even looking, no, and you can also, I mean, and look back. I mean, I do look back all the time, and I tell my grad students now that I always go look back. I make my very first, I always go back to my first publication. It was in 1999. And it was a very short paper in a Colombian journal, a very good Colombian journal. But I look at that now and I'm like, oh my gosh, how did this get, I mean, sometimes I'm even harsh to myself, like, how did this get published? And then I realize, and sometimes I remember that, and that would be another piece of advice for us, to international students. Once you get to that point, be kind. I always tell my students, be kind to your past. Mm-hmm. Because sometimes we can be doctoral programs can teach you to be super critical and even hypercritical, but in becoming hypercritical, we sometimes become mean to our past.
And mean to yourself.
Or to yourself. Yeah. So sometimes I'm like, yeah. And so I always go, and so now I've gotten better over the years. And I'm like, I go back and look at my first papers, and I'm like, and I still smile and chuckle a little bit, but I'm like, I can see the progression, and I can see that there has been growth, that the 1999 version of Raul, and I look at the 2018 version, aside from being older, I see a lot of growth. And that makes me feel like, okay, there's still a lot of work I have to do, but I have come a long way. And sometimes when you're dealing, especially when you're dealing with developing an academic career involving your second language and your first language, but sometimes your second language, especially people who are in English ed, we're going to be dealing with English as our second language all the time. It's not a bad thing to give yourself a pat on the back. Yeah. And then kind of go back and face the challenge. But I think that's the first thing for international students is learning to navigate those language issues and but without being afraid to say what you have to say. And I think that's one of the big pieces of advice I like to always give international students is when you are communicating, don't apologize for your language, or don't apologize for whatever your English sounds, because you are making a huge effort. I mean, you are making a tremendous effort into communicating your thoughts in a language that is not necessarily yours. So you haven't gotten to the point of owning it or feeling that it's yours. And grad school is going to be that journey where you're going to finally own that second language that you have. But I would say don't start a class or don't start apologizing for something you shouldn't. I mean, we have long been plagued by this idea that bilingual speakers have to apologize for not speaking the second language up to some non-existent standards or some made-up standards by someone. And that has to stop at some point, because that also causes a lot of anxiety on international students, that the fact that they don't sound like this, or they don't look like this, or I witnessed that also caused anxiety and caused a lot of frustration. So I would say, don't worry about what you sound, about the way you sound. Worry about having something really, really smart and interesting and exciting to say. Once you have something smart, interesting, and exciting to say, most people, or almost everyone, is going to gloss over whatever it sounds like, because they'll be more interested in the content.
Yeah, I think that's an important point, that it's really the substance of what you're saying. And people, if they don't understand, can ask questions. They can always ask you to explain more. And I think the other thing too is, even people who are speaking the native language, when you go into graduate school, you have to learn a whole different way of thinking. At least I did, thinking and speaking and communicating and writing. So as an international student, you've got both of those layers to deal with, right? Because you may not, like you said, you may not have command of the language. It may not feel like your own. And so you're working on that. But then you're also learning how to read and write and talk about ideas and texts in a way that might be brand new to you.
Yeah, and it actually, that's a good point. It's for everyone. I think that's another thing we have to demystify. This idea that native speakers, when they go to grad school, they got it all figured out, and it's the international students who are really lost and adrift. And I say that because I was an English teacher for 10 years before I studied grad school, and as I said, there were some things about the language that I was comfortable with, but then when I got there, I had to learn I had to learn something as simple as how to focus and keep my argument straight.
Mm-hmm.
And I had to be taught. I had to be taught how to focus and keep my argument like in a more linear fashion and not necessarily go off the rails every time I was talking. That took training. That took time.
Mm-hmm.
That took experience. And most importantly, that took mentors. And I think that's a good.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. I was going to say, I just had a student in my office today that said and she's a native English speaker, and she, what you just described with argument flowing through threading through the whole piece, she just said that's the thing that she has the toughest time with, that she needs help with. So everybody's got these issues. I think some of us pretend that we don't have these issues. Some you will always see those, graduate students that act like they have it all figured out and they know what they're doing, but they don't. They really don't.
No, and we don't. I mean, like sometimes even academics don't.
Mm-hmm.
And I've heard some really interesting academics in the past 3 or 4 or 5 years going into conference and saying, yeah, I mean, sometimes I feel like a fraud. Or, I mean, one of the most refreshing moments was 2 years ago in Nashville in LA when Alan Luke goes and says in his Lifetime Achievement Award speech that when he got it, he felt like a fraud. And I'm like, okay, that's refreshing and scary at the same time. Very scary, but very refreshing. Because sometimes it's dealing, and sometimes I tell that to my students, it's not the fact that what is the difference between you and me now, it's not necessarily that I am smarter than you or that I have published more than you have. No, it makes sometimes the difference is I know how to navigate uncertainty.
You have more experience.
I have more experience navigating uncertainty, so I'm more unfazed. I become more unfazed by the uncertainty of, for example, dealing with your research project, or the uncertainty of putting together the research question, which takes a while, which probably you're gonna be fixing that until you submit the final draft to your defense. It's just that over time I've learned to navigate those things and feel less worried about some of the language barriers that could be around. But it's just experience. It's just the fact that I have crossed those. I mean, I have walked the walk. And that allows me to not get so freaked out as I was when I was starting my master's program in 2002. Like, I mean, everything I remember even the process of writing, it was crazy. Because I remember writing the first papers and I had no idea, in 2002, I had no idea what APA was. Like, literally no clue. And I remember writing my first papers for my research methods class. And I remember like sitting in my bedroom, having like the laptop in front of me, I think I had a desktop at the time in front of me, typing the paper. And on my lap, I had the APA manual. Like right on my lap, I had like all the books stacked to the sides, and right on my lap for like that first semester, fall 2002. When I was finishing the papers, I had the APA manual on my lap because I had to go back and look at it every time.
Mm-hmm.
So those are little things you learn to navigate, but don't let those little things scare you. And especially, I would say, in terms of the writing, I see that there is a lot of I don't know what to call it, but I think students are too concerned with the style itself, and not focused enough on working on the content.
Yeah, and I
think,
yes. No, I was gonna say, I hear that from everybody. I hear that from international students. I hear that from non-international students. And I mean, I just said to somebody last night, like, don't get in your head that this has to look a particular way. Get those ideas out. Get that content out. And then you can start getting it into shape, so it fits a structure.
Yeah, and when you're working on the second language, I mean, the process of writing, it's gonna take a little longer because you're gonna have to do a little more editing.
Mm-hmm.
But get those drafts out there, and don't worry about I would say don't worry so much about the APA, because that can be fixed. That you can fix it. When learning and usually learn, as we said, sometimes I think getting the APA is kind of like learning to understand the manual, so you can work around everything it doesn't cover.
Mm-hmm.
But that's something you can learn later, and then you can. But I would worry more about how to get those ideas out there without being afraid, because sometimes I see second language writers can be very, very afraid of sharing drafts, because they're afraid they're going to tear them apart. Like, guys, they're gonna tear them apart even no matter what. If you get good mentors, they're gonna tear your drafts apart. So that is beside the point.
Yeah,
but lose the fear of writing, lose the fear of, I mean, most importantly, I would say lose the fear of speaking up, because we as international students, we have very interesting things to say, and we can make great contributions to the conversations. Especially in times like these, we need to have the more and more global perspectives about different issues that surround us.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for taking the time to share with us how to navigate this, navigate these waters as an international grad student, because you've been hugely successful. This is going to be so helpful to so many people. So I really appreciate you taking the time to do this.
It's my pleasure. I think I always like to do this because we all need mirrors. We all need mirrors, and international students sometimes also need to see international faculty, or whether they they stay in the U.S. or they go back to the countries. They need to hear from people who were international students and navigated those waters and were able to do it well. Again, we all need mirrors. We all need an example. I mean, something that we can say, oh, it's possible, and we can get out of here and we can do it well. So I appreciate the opportunity to share my thoughts in this interview.
So again, we're talking with Dr. Raul A. Mora, and if you have questions about how to be successful as an international graduate student, go down to the comments, tell us what you're thinking, leave your questions. We would love to hear from you, and we are happy to continue this conversation in the comment section of the video. So thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.